The waiting room smelled of industrial bleach and copper. It was 1942, but the air inside the Harlem hospital felt like a century ago. On the gurney, she couldn't scream. Her jaw was wired shut, held together by cold steel and prayers. A single heavy blow from a mahogany nightstick had done the work. The officer had called it resisting. The witnesses called it a crime. But in this room, there were no witnesses. Only the sound of a radiator hissing and the rhythmic, terrifyingly calm breathing of the man sitting in the corner. He didn't look at the doctors. He didn't look at the police guards stationed at the end of the hall, their thumbs tucked into their belts with an arrogance that only comes from wearing a badge in a neighborhood you don't belong to. He looked only at the woman. He watched the way her eyes darted in terror every time a heavy boot clicked on the linoleum outside. He felt her fear. He wore it like a second skin. His hand, encased in a leather glove, rested on the arm of the wooden chair. It didn't move. He was a statue carved from the very obsidian of the night. Inside, the gears were turning with a precision that would have frightened a watchmaker. He wasn't thinking about revenge. Revenge is a messy, emotional thing. He was thinking about a reckoning. He was measuring the distance between the precinct and the street. He was weighing the value of a badge against the price of a broken bone. The silence in the room grew heavy, a physical weight that made the air hard to swallow. The officer at the door glanced in, his smirk faltering as he met the gaze of the man in the chair. He saw something in those eyes that wasn't supposed to be there, not in Harlem, not in 1942. He saw the look of a judge who had already passed the sentence. The radiator clicked. A nurse gasped in the hallway. The man stood up, his coat falling perfectly into place, and he didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The air in the hospital had already changed. The city was about to learn that some debts can't be settled with a report. If you're drawn to the untold power stories of Harlem and the men who ruled without noise, you're already in the right place. This is Bumpy Johnson Files. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. The official records of the 28th Precinct don't mention that week in July. The logbooks were signed, the incidents were filed, and the truth was buried under a mountain of bureaucratic ink. They wanted the world to believe that the peace was kept by the law. They wanted you to think that justice was something handed down from a bench. But the files that were erased, the ones kept in the memories of the people who lived on 125th Street, tell a different story. This is the account of the week Harlem stopped being a precinct and started being a sovereign state. This story will change everything you thought you knew about where true authority lives. Before he was the master of the numbers, Ellsworth was a man who carried the weight of his mother's prayers and his father's silence. He grew up seeing the world through the cracks of a society that didn't want him to see at all. He felt the sting of every insult thrown at his neighbors, every hand laid on a woman who was just trying to get home from a shift at the laundry. He wasn't a man of many words, because words were cheap in a place where your life could be taken for a wrong look. He wrestled with a quiet, burning fire, a need to protect the only world he knew, even if it meant becoming the devil to do it. He sat in his apartment, the smoke from his cigar curling toward the ceiling like a ghost. He thought about the woman in the hospital. She wasn't a queen. She wasn't a player in the game. She was a daughter of Harlem, and to Bumpy, that made her sacred. He felt a pressure in his chest, a moral struggle that most men in his position would have ignored. It would have been easier to pay the medical bills and walk away, but Bumpy knew that if you let a man break one jaw, he'll eventually try to break the heart of the whole neighborhood. The name Bumpy was starting to carry a different frequency now. It wasn't just a nickname for a tough guy, it was a warning. It was the name you whispered when the landlord came for money you didn't have, or a crooked cop got too heavy with his hands. He didn't need to shout. His power was revealed in the way the local politicians looked at their shoes when he walked into the room. It was revealed in the respect shown in the absolute silence of the barber shops when his car pulled up to the curb. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was becoming a boundary. The tension began to escalate within 24 hours of the hospital visit. What the precinct didn't know was that every movement of every officer was being tracked by eyes they couldn't see. The man who had swung the nightstick, an officer named Miller, felt the shift first. His coffee was cold when it shouldn't have been. His informants suddenly had nothing to say. The streets of Harlem, usually a riot of sound and life, went deathly quiet whenever his patrol car turned a corner. This is where everything changed. Miller thought he was the law, but he was quickly realizing he was just a guest in a house that didn't want him there. Bumpy made a move that no one expected. He didn't send a hitman to a dark alley. He didn't order a drive-by. He did something far more terrifying. He orchestrated a strike of the spirit. One by one, the services the precinct relied on began to evaporate. The deliveries stopped. The cleaners wouldn't take the uniforms. Even the trash outside the station house began to pile up. It was a psychological siege, a tightening of the noose that no bullet could stop. That decision would haunt the commissioner for years to come. No section of the city had ever dared to simply stop. As the week reached its climax, Bumpy delayed the final payoff on purpose. He wanted Miller to sweat. He wanted the entire department to feel the fragility of their control. He sat in his car outside the precinct every night at midnight. He didn't do anything. He just sat there, the glow of his cigarette the only light in the dark. The officers inside watched him through the windows, their hands on their holsters, their hearts hammering against their ribs. They were waiting for an explosion, but Bumpy was giving them the silence of a funeral. Officer Miller was forced to walk out, not by Bumpy, but by his own superiors who realized they couldn't hold the city if they didn't offer a sacrifice. The reveal was quiet, dominant, and purely psychological. Miller, the man who had broken a woman's jaw with a smirk, had to walk through that silent crowd. He had to look into the eyes of the people he had spent years terrorizing. When he reached Bumpy, the king didn't strike him. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply leaned in and handed Miller a small velvet box. Inside was the dental bill, paid in full, and a single silver coin. Bumpy didn't say a word. He just turned his back on the officer and walked away. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, and Miller was left standing in the middle of a street that no longer feared him. It was a public, undeniable execution of his authority. He resigned the next morning. The story spread like a legend. It wasn't just about a broken jaw anymore. It was about the moment Harlem realized it didn't need to ask for justice. It could manufacture its own. The rules of the city permanently shifted. The police still patrolled, but they walked a little faster, and they kept their nightsticks a little closer to their sides. They knew that there was a shadow watching them, a shadow that didn't play by the rules of the court. Power is not found in the strike of a club. It is found in the ability to make the man holding the club afraid to use it. It is a game of patience, of knowing that true control doesn't come from violence, but from the unwavering presence of a man who knows exactly who he is. Foresight is the only true shield. Sovereignty is the only true peace. Bumpy Johnson didn't just save a woman's dignity that week. He saved the soul of a neighborhood by showing them that even the tallest wall can be brought down by a man who refuses to look away. This is Bumpy Johnson Files. Subscribe for the stories history tried to bury.